Thank you all for checking in. And I know that the reason why you're here today is because we have a very special guest with us. Joining us from Washington, D.C. in the United States is WYCUP's new CEO, Alyssa McCarter-Laborde. Alyssa comes to WYCUP with 20 years. Good morning, Alyssa. Welcome. Alyssa comes to WYCUP with over 20 years of experience in leading organizations that are dedicated to designing financial products and services for low-income segments. And since 2009, Alyssa has served as the CEO of Vitus Group, which is a for-profit holding company that she established under Global Communities, an international development and humanitarian organization that operates in 27 countries around the world. So Vitus Group has become one of the largest commercial retail microfinance operations in the Middle East, thanks to Alyssa's leadership. And over the last decade, its subsidiaries have dispersed over $3 billion at less than 1% annual default rate to small business owners. So with that, welcome, Alyssa, and thank you for joining us today. I want to start us off with a few questions for you, Alyssa, but the purpose of this session, I want to let everybody know, is to provide the WYCUP Affiliates Council members with the opportunity to connect with you directly and to ask the questions that they want to know about you, about WYCUP, about your vision for WYCUP. So I'm going to kick us off with a few questions, but please, for the rest of you on the call today, just raise your hand, and this is an open forum today for you to ask your questions directly to Alyssa. So here we go. So Alyssa, first question for you. At WYCUP, we often talk about our professional journeys and the diversity of the paths that we take to our positions of leadership. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit with us about some background on the path that you took to get to where you are today and what it was about WYCUP specifically that attracted you to this position.
Thank you, Tom. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I have been looking forward to this session for a while because this network of young people is one of the things important to me and part of the reason, certainly, that I was interested in joining World Council. So let me just start with that I've really been looking forward to this and thinking how to answer this question, Tom, that you sent me on my path. How do I answer this really intentionally for you that are young leaders on this call? And what I thought about was that a career path is never actually a straight line. There are a lot of choices that we make along the way. And when I look back, it all followed the same direction, but I had a number of choices and decisions as a young person that I made that had consequences. And so I think my biggest message is, the sooner you can know your personal core values, what you care about, and who you want to be, those choices become easier. So I say this because I actually started my career, 20 years in financial inclusion. But I started my career getting out of school. I went to Georgetown. I did some graduate work there. And I was lucky that I had a choice getting out of school. I had two job offers. One that was a reasonably well-paying job as an entry level into US government foreign service. Something I thought I wanted to do. I studied diplomacy. I really wanted to work in developing countries, but I wanted to be at a policy level. I wanted to see reform. And then I had another job offer that was a very low paying job to an overseas country I had hardly heard of, to Armenia, part of the former Soviet Union. And because I was a curious and probably fairly risk-taking young person, I took the low paying job in a country I'd never heard of. That was probably the best decision I made because what happened was I immediately got my head around some really difficult issues that low-income women in that country were facing. And part of the driver of my decision at that time was that if I want to work at a strategy or a policy level, if I want to create change, I really need to understand on a day-to-day basis what people are facing. And so my first job in financial inclusion and microfinance was literally as a debt collector, going door to door, sitting in the living rooms of very low income women and listening to their stories and trying to figure out how would you design a product or a program that could help them solve for the barriers they were facing. Some of that was income inequality and the lack of jobs. Some of that was social unrest, and an economic depression in the aftermath of an earthquake and then the fall of the Soviet Union. So I listened, and probably the best skill that I was able to learn at a young age was that skill of active listening. So my path was not a straight one, but over the last 2 decades, Tom gave you a little bit of my bio. I found myself always in a position of leading startups or turnarounds or trying to grow something small into something bigger. And so one of the reasons that I was attracted to the World Council is this very large global platform that we have with all of these different experiences in credit unions and cooperative models, which are not about the money, it's about people helping people. And so that really speaks to my core values of how I've made decisions, how I have always tried to put myself in uncomfortable positions, because I think that's how you learn. And hopefully to now in this new job, position myself to try to really influence things for the better. Right? The last 18 months of a pandemic have probably showed you that my generation has not done the best job at solving inequality and trying to really help people live financially healthy lives. I think we all, learning from you and your new ideas and the collaboration that we have as professionals, can hopefully help us figure out how do we do a better job in the coming years. Tom, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry. So thank you for that, Alyssa. You mentioned our core values, and that really is the key element that binds all of us together here at the WYCUP Affiliates Council specifically, and this opportunity that we have to come together and be active listeners to learn from one another. And as we started out on this initiative, just for the first time earlier this year, growing something small into something bigger. So thank you for inspiring us in your new role and coming in and recognizing the value and the potential that we have to do something big with WYCUP. So in a recent interview that you did with the Credit Union Times, you were asked about your thoughts on being the first female CEO at WYCUP. And you stated in that interview that you think a diversity of perspective experience approach is a good business practice. And so that really resonated with me, as one of the goals of WYCUP is to bring together this diversity of perspectives on the shared challenge that all credit unions face of the issue of relevance and how can we be more relevant to young people. And so I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on your views of this diversity of perspective experience. What, in terms of your challenges, and what have been the biggest challenges that you've had to overcome on your professional journey, and how did that diversity of perspective help you in that process?
I like the way that you're phrasing this, because I do think I get asked the question, about being the first woman. And I think I said in that interview, calling out first is important, because until it's normal, we need to call out and make people aware of the importance of having diversity in the boardroom, diversity in leadership. And I think that goes beyond gender. So I'm glad that you raised that, because the evidence shows diversity in decision and consultation and how we collaborate in a way that we challenge one another, that really makes the best business case. And there's lots of evidence, McKinsey, PwC, you name it, for the companies that do better or the companies that have more diverse perspectives. What I have found is that where I used to always be the youngest person in the room, I've now turned that corner where I tend to be one of the older people in the room, maybe not the oldest, but one of the older people. And I think one of the challenges, that I face that perhaps is relevant to each of you when you're the youngest in a room, or you're the only woman in the room, or you're the only person of color in a room, it really takes a good amount of emotional intelligence to figure out, how do I influence things in a way that's positive, that's not overstepping or makes me sound like the young, impatient person who could do it better. I think I, have had my time where I had bosses that I thought, I disagreed with. I might have done it better. What I really learned is that we can learn something from everyone. And my impatience and ambition as a young person was measured when I faced a crisis, and I could see that my older colleagues, or people with just a lot more experience that doesn't come without years of, facing crises, that they really showed me how to manage certain very difficult situations. And I think the same thing with women. Women tend to have a different perspective in the middle of crisis, in multitasking and looking at all different angles of a perspective. So I think the same thing goes for young people. You have a lot to learn from others, as we, those of us who have turned the corner, still have a lot to learn from you. I teach a class, actually, it's my 11th year of teaching, so that really makes me sound old. My 11th year of teaching at Johns Hopkins University. It's a university here in the DC area. It's a graduate seminar on financial inclusion. And over the years, it's changed from microfinance to fintech and innovation. How do we serve bottom of the pyramid markets? And, it's my side job. So it's something I do kind of on the side, which means that it's a lot of work for not very much financial return. But I get so much value out of young people starting their careers who ask me really tough questions. And it forces me to really rethink of all the things I've done and the years of experience. There's still questions I'm not asking that I need to be asking. And so I would say that, the proof in diversity on boards and in leadership is not only the evidence by McKinsey and the people who put together those statistical reports, but I think it's borne out in firsthand experience. I certainly like to tell every young person that I hire, my students that come out of my class, one day the tables are going to be turned, and you're going to be in my job, and you're going to be the one hiring me as a consultant to help you figure out some particular problem, right? So tables will turn. And so I think that's an opportunity to really think about, what can you learn from the people around you, from your peers, from your supervisors, and from mentees that you can seek out, right? You can also be a mentor to others, even at a young point in your career. And that kind of, what I would say, around the 360 network of building colleagues and peers and those who you can inspire and who can inspire you is really, in my personal experience, made the difference in becoming a better leader and ultimately, getting the satisfaction of the career that you carve out for yourself.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Alyssa. I agree with you completely on this issue of no longer being the youngest person in the room. For me, this has been an eye-opener, and it happens so fast. I can't tell you all how quickly that you go from being that youngest person or one of the younger voices to where we are today, wherever that is. And so, but one of the things that I found in that process of working with young professionals through WYCUP is exactly what you mentioned, is that this group really keeps me on my toes. And by focusing on those tough questions that you mentioned, I think that it's been really rewarding for me to be involved with this group and to have the opportunity to connect them and to learn from one another. So I have, the next question that I have for you is actually the same question that just came across the chat here from Valentina Murgatina-Lova from Russia. And Valentina asks, Alyssa, tell us about the plans for future work of the World Council. Will the internal policy of the world movement change, or will it be consistent? And how, according to the forecasts of World Council, can the role of credit unions in the world change due to the pandemic? Or will everything remain the same and nothing will prevent our movement from developing in a planned way? Great questions, Valentina.
Great question. Great question. Well, my first reaction is cut me some slack because I've been here for 60 days and I don't have all the answers yet. So I'm 60 days in, actually, 65 days in, I think, and counting, to this role at World Council. What I can say is that, new leadership comes change, right? And I'm not going to say it's going to be better, but it'll definitely be different, as it should be. And just like the last 18, 19 months of a pandemic also means that the world has changed. The world is different. And so I don't think that means we all go back to what was before. I don't think there's any going back. There's only the challenge of how do we respond to the great disparities that this pandemic has unleashed, right? They were always there, but the kinds of inequality, the kinds of vulnerability of even middle income families, I certainly saw that in my neighborhood here in a wealthier, part of Virginia. I live on the Virginia side, just outside of DC. I think that really begs us to reconsider what are we doing as credit union professionals and those who care about and who study the evidence that people's access to good financial tools and resources is directly correlated to their ability to live healthy lives and the advancements, the socioeconomic advancement of countries. And so to answer that question, I am still trying to figure out what really matters for the World Council as we look at the 2 or 3 perhaps most important areas we could invest in the coming years to have the biggest impact on our members, our member associations, and ultimately the biggest impact on our end members, on the consumers that we are here to serve. That's why we're in business. So I don't have it all worked out. What I can tell you is, my experience and the long view as a practitioner, really trying to figure out how do we advance financial inclusion so every citizen has access to the right tools, the right choices that they can have to make good decisions, to invest in livelihoods, to send their kids to school, all the things that we commonly share, even if we live in different cultures and have different perspectives. I'm really trying to figure out what do we do next and where do we focus? And certainly one of the first things I hear from all of our credit union members and leaders is that we need to grow and we need to be more inclusive in our membership. And that's not just on leadership, but that's on our members and growing and reaching young members. And I know that Tom has talked to you about this because I have a big interest in WYCUP helping us figure out how do we really message ourselves to growing the next generation of credit union members. I have 3 kids. They are, I guess they're Gen Z. And I've, recently been outnumbered by millennials who work in the office down here in DC. And what I love about the younger generations is that, of course, there's impatience like we all had as young people, but I think there's a real genuine view that, I want to contribute something and spend my time in a way that matters. And so I think when we look at credit unions and why we are here, the business model behind a credit union is set up in a way that we should be able to really focus on what matters. And so that is around growing membership and trying to figure out what are the better products and services that we could design, deliver at scale that really solves for the barriers people still face. And those are things like accumulating wealth and assets over time. We have failed, in my view, as financial inclusion practitioners at really trying to create ways that generations accumulate wealth and are better off in the future than they have been in the past. And those are things like insurance products that weather against really catastrophic risk, savings at an early age that allows you to really save for your kids' education. Those are many different kinds of financial tools and education that helps people understand how to manage their resources really wisely so that they can have opportunity and they can ultimately live their dreams. So ultimately, that's what I think I'd like to see the World Council do. How do we surface the kinds of innovations, the kinds of interesting demonstration models that I know exist in many of our members? How do we share that learning? How do we invest in the next generation of leadership? And then how do we ultimately do a better job in serving especially low-income customers, but basically every member? Because I think we deserve, as a human race, I think a better structure than my generation has been able to put in place. So that's a big ask. And that's not to say it all falls on the next generation's shoulders. But going back to the first point I made, I think that what should be different is an acknowledgement that we don't always get it right, that there's always something to learn, and that we are better by listening to everyone's unique ideas, good or bad. And that's how we ultimately improve. That's how you innovate, right? You test and you fail and you innovate and you create something better.
As a follow-up question to that, Alyssa, how do you see microfinance and credit unions overlapping, intersecting, and contrasting? The question is kind of in relation to how do you square your previous work to your new work at WYCUP?
So as an outsider to credit unions, I didn't know that there was such a thing as being an insider until I came over to World Council. And what I would say is that, having spent many years working with a lot of different colleagues and professionals, I have been agnostic to the business model. At the end of the day, it's about how do you design financial tools and products that serve every citizen in a country. And that means that there's room for everybody. There's room for fintechs, there's room for credit unions, there's room for banks, there's room for microfinance banks. I think there's room for specialized SME lenders like what I was able to create at Vitas. So I think a lot of my experience, I would like to say, directly translates, because it's not so much about the mechanism, it's about the end outcome of what we're trying to achieve. And so I think there's not one perfect business model. What I like, or what has attracted me for many years in looking at credit unions and cooperative models as part of the fabric of how do we create financial systems that work for everybody, is the fact that it's based very much on savings, on giving voice to members, and in trying to always focus on ultimately a social mission while running a good business. And for me, those were all the things that I thought about in microfinance. It was just that there was a different regulatory law that I worked under and a different set of parameters. But what I think is the same and is important is that we want to attract the best professionals in every country and allow them to work in an environment where they use their best skills ultimately for the mission of helping design products and services that really work for low-income people in particular. And so I'd like to think that my experience translates. I still have a lot to learn about cooperative principles. There's 6 of them. I can't name them all yet. But I think that that's something where I'm still doing my active listening and learning what is unique and what might differentiate us as credit union leaders. And then we should absolutely use that to position ourselves in a unique moment, I think, where those who are good bankers, but ultimately do it in a way that helps solve for those barriers I talked about. I think that's where policy makers, regulators, the average person should be able to really get on board with, right? Because that matters. Why you do something is important. How you do it is important, but ultimately we want to achieve impact and we want to achieve the outcomes we're set out to do.
Well, Alyssa, congratulations on reaching the 60-day mark here at WYCUP. I know that you had your first board meeting last week, and so congratulations on surviving that, and hopefully many more to come. During your short time at WYCUP, you have made, I want everyone to know this, that you've made an effort to connect individually with every single one of us on staff and to learn about not just our efforts and the work that we do at WYCUP, but also to give us the opportunity to share a bit about our passion that we have for the cooperative sector. And so you should know that, we talk about you when you're not around. It's good. And we're all really, really appreciate the openness that you brought to this position and the positive energy that you bring to our team. So thank you so much for that. We have time for, I think, a couple more questions, but one of the questions that I have for you is, how can we at WYCUP, and specifically the folks on this call that represent the leadership from across the global credit union systems youth movement, what can we do to help you achieve your goals and the vision that you have for World Council?
That's a great question. And I'm still learning who you are and what your own goals and objectives are. But I honestly think that there is this very critical moment of defining how we really can grow credit unions in a way that is more visible, that is about collaboration and innovation and partnership to ultimately achieve the kind of scale and reach and deeper, what I would call deeper and richer set of financial services towards our members. And for me, where we have young leaders, where we have this kind of collaborative spirit, that will certainly help me in my desire to understand where we have good ideas, how do we test and replicate innovations in certain countries and apply them to the next 5 countries? How do we use technology, not for technology's sake, but because it really can solve for a lot of barriers and pain points? We've seen that through digital platforms. And you look at Uber, you can connect every last fragmented, disparate driver and small business. So I think about that. How do you really vision the kind of digital platform that allows us to bring all kinds of products and services that we might not otherwise be able to deliver on through those kinds of collaborative marketplaces? Young people understand that much better than Tom, those of us who have turned the corner, right? I'm pretty savvy in strategy, but technology and some of the latest innovations are things that I'm still trying to get my head around. So I think that this network, is really important for World Council, not only because we need to hear the perspectives and the voice of young people, not only because we can learn from you, but because you are the next generation of leadership. I also think that you also have a unique place to help us surface some of these good ideas, innovations, things that are working, problems that you see. Because in any business I've been part of, those who were closest to what I would call the front line, who are closest to thinking about what's possible, that's how innovation happens. That's how good ideas get surfaced. And so I'm glad you pointed out, I am trying to spend time with everyone, but it's a genuine desire to understand what I don't know and how could I really put some wings under a group of people who really care, who are the best of what we can be, and can help us really define what are the things we're missing, what more could we be doing, how more could we be investing for the benefit of growing our credit union movement.
Thank you for that. I will say that, Alyssa, without a doubt, you have captivated this group. We've had monthly meetings now for most of this year. And as I scroll through the videos of, people listening to you, the eyes are glued to the screen. And I know that they're paying attention to you and not to their emails. So thank you for that. You have captivated us. Thank you for believing in us. Thank you for recognizing the value that we can bring to the sector. And thank you for inspiring us to do more. I know that this is the first of what I hope will be a regular conversation that we have about WYCUP and how we can do more to support the goals of the World Council and to support our member organizations and communities all around the world. So thank you for that, Alyssa.
Thank you, Tom. Listen, anytime. And let me just say that I think there's big expectations about me. It's nice to have the compliments, but absolutely hold me accountable. And that's what leaders should be. So I am definitely open to constructive ideas to, how can we really make a better world through credit unions? Thank you for letting me join your meeting. I hope to catch the next one too. Thanks again.
Awesome. Thank you, Alyssa. Take care. Bye-bye.